Welcome to the 𝙬𝙘𝙧 podcast. This series focuses on elevating and inspiring women and girls into or to remain in the tech sector from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm Kelly Kwarteng, founder and CEO of 𝙎𝙥𝙞𝙬𝙧 and host of the show. The FT's staff in offices and locations around the world, to systems and technology which produce the FT subscription products and other customer and business-facing services. Prior to joining the FT, Rebecca's career has largely centred on news and entertainment media in companies including Napster, BBC, Sky and TiVo. Over the past couple of years, she's been working as an independent consultant with an EDI consultancy where she facilitated workshops and inclusive leadership training. She claims to have gotten into tech by accident after originally taking degrees in education, but loves what she does and appreciates the privilege of leading teams in complex organisations with interesting challenges and problems to solve. Originally from Maine, USA, Rebecca's lived in the UK for more than 20 years now. She loves being outside, walking or gardening, or thinking that she enjoys knitting, sewing and cooking as outlets for creativity. In the episode, we'll be exploring Rebecca's squiggly career path and the key lessons that she's learned as a woman in tech. Rebecca will be sharing her perspectives on authentic leadership, creating inclusive teams, and why equity in the workplace is important. So, Rebecca, first off, thanks a lot for joining us today and coming on board with the 𝙬𝙧𝙬 Women in Tech podcast.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to, telling a few stories.
Perfect. Well, let's kick things off then right at the start. And I think it would be great for our audience to know a little bit more about you and could share your journey so far. And I suppose what led you to being the CTO at the Financial Times?
Sure. Well, you described some of it in your introduction there. Thanks for that. I guess most people are surprised to learn that I started out, when I left school, I wanted to be a maths teacher and then changed my mind just as I was graduating from uni and then took on some jobs at the university, stretching into technology, that accidental kind of falling into some different roles there. And then after a bunch of years, I packed it all in and moved to the UK. So when I first came to the UK, I was kind of like, I'll take anything. And that's where I started working for a company called TiVo. It was an operational role in their customer services and tech support area. So again, a tiny bit of technology creeping in there. And then TiVo was partnering with Sky back then. Then I moved to a kind of similar role in Sky, again, customer services and tech support. And then while I was at Sky, I was offered a role as a project manager on a web and interactive TV project. And I was really anxious about that. Like I thought this must be some kind of mistake. But the manager that I ended up working for had spotted my ability and I guess my attitude, what I could bring to a role like that. And he backed me and I thought, well, why not? I'll just give it a go. And so I did that for a couple of years and then left on a high, having achieved great things on the project I was working on. I took a program manager role in a small consultancy on a very large project. That was about video on demand services with UK public service broadcasters. It didn't last very long and has kind of gone down in the annals of history around the competition commission investigations into, there's all sorts of things. That's kind of a boring story, but I worked on that program, and that's when I started to realize that leadership was kind of a thing I was interested in. I didn't call it that at the time. I didn't think about it in those terms, but leading a large program and bringing people together from different companies and different disciplines to work together on a shared goal. I really, really enjoyed it. And when that project was shut down, I was invited to apply for a role at the BBC. And that was because of the relationships I'd built and the success I had made in that program of work. So off I went to the BBC. There I took a role as head of department. I was introducing and formalizing a product management discipline in the kind of music and radio and music department at the BBC. Again, I wasn't sure about my own credentials, but the manager who hired me was sure about what I could bring to the role, saw the potential, kind of encouraged me, and that's where I started my career at the BBC. I switched roles a few different times. Over 11 years, I was in 6 different leadership roles at the BBC. And then I took some time out. And as you said, I've been working as an independent consultant. I was kind of mixing up some voluntary work, some consulting to pay the bills, dabbling in EDI consulting and leadership development there. So that was nice. But then early last year, probably about this time last year, I was beginning to face up to the fact that I'm not cut out to sell myself as a consultant. I spotted this role at the FT, and here I am. It seemed to speak to things I've done before, but in a different context, with a more commercial flavor, new team, new colleagues, new stakeholders, new constraints and opportunities, and I jumped at the chance.
Wow, what a journey. And I think, truly inspiring. I'm sure there's many stories you can tell from those many different roles that you've had. And starting out from wanting to be that maths teacher over in the US to now being the CTO at the Financial Times just shows the journey that you can go on, the paths that you can take. And we're going to talk about, obviously, the episode's called Be the Spider, Not the Fly. So we're going to come into that a little bit more later, but I think it's great to see the types of organisations you've been at, the size of projects and programmes that you've worked on, and the journey that you've taken. So thanks for sharing that. With the title being for the episode, Be the Spider, Not the Fly, listeners might be thinking, what on earth does that mean? I heard you give the talk at Women of the Silicon Roundabout. It really inspired me, and I had to come and speak to you straight after and be like, hey, I really need you on my podcast. And thankfully, here we are today. So for our audience that may not have heard that talk, can you explain the spider versus the fly metaphor, and how does it connect with your nonlinear journey from wanting to be a maths teacher to CTO at the Financial Times, and why you encourage others to embrace nonlinear paths over traditional ladder climbing?
Yeah, the talk I gave is designed to share my experience of like an unintentional career path on a squiggly line or a zigzag line, in order to, as you say, to encourage other people to be okay with following a similar pattern, that it's not necessary or expected anymore to follow a straight line career development, or this notion of climbing the career ladder. It's I think it's outdated, and I think in particular it doesn't suit many women. I think it doesn't suit creative people either. I think human beings crave knowledge and experience, and you don't always get that by going in a straight line. So it's kind of about resisting feeling the pressure on society, that society places on us, that our families place on us, that history and traditions place on us, and sometimes in workplaces places on us.
Yeah.
I think the pressure is lessening these days, but there always used to be pressure on people coming out of school to know what they want to do and what they want to be. And then you have to kind of stick to that. You have to stick to that career, or you have to stick in that industry. And I think it's just nonsense. It's not modern. It's unrealistic. And I think it's becoming less and less common these days. So it's nice to be able to say out loud to hundreds of people, I didn't do that, and it's working for me. So maybe you could give it a go too. The spider metaphor, the spider web metaphor for the squiggly path is borrowed. That's not my original work. I heard someone else use it a bunch of years ago, and I haven't done my research properly. But if you ask an LLM near you, it will eventually turn up the original reference. There was a woman who wrote a book in the 90s, and she used the spider web as a metaphor to describe a non-traditional career path. And I've adapted it a little bit to describe the personas of a spider and a fly in the web. The fly is trapped in a web. The spider is in charge of the web. So if you feel like a fly, then maybe you're trapped by someone else's expectation on you, or this feeling of responsibility that when you embark on a career, you have to stick to it. But it doesn't have to be that way. You should try and be the spider, be in charge of the web, know how to navigate it, repair it if necessary, and keep going. And I kind of stay away from the whole spider eats fly thing. It's not about eating or anything like that. It's more about, whether you're taking charge or you're just getting stuck.
Brilliant. I love that mindset. I think it's such a great metaphor to use, and I'm sure there's many people that are listening in right now that can probably relate to potentially being a fly at some points and being the spider and roles reversing. But I think I really like the way that you break that down. I'm sure your journey along the way, you've experienced a lot as a woman in the tech space. So would you mind sharing with us what has been some of your best and worst encounters that you've experienced along the way as a woman in tech?
It's a tough question for me to answer, because I spent the early part of my career really trying to fit in, not to emphasize my gender, not to stand out, not to be different in any way. And so I suppose because of that, I didn't notice a lot of little events that would be considered discriminatory today, or microaggressions even. I probably even participated in them. It's probably only in the last 10 years or so that I began to embrace and celebrate what was different about me as a woman in tech. Like I've always been happy to be a bit different and a bit quirky. I like to sometimes bring my knitting on the bus and stuff like that. And I'm very comfortable in my own skin in those sorts of ways. But being a woman in tech and identifying that strongly with that that part of who I am is something I've only come to recently. And I think I resisted it, as many people do initially, because I didn't want to be singled out. And I didn't want to have the responsibility of representing, a whole segment of our workforce. But then I'm not quite sure what changed my view, but I came to realize that treating myself as a potential role model was not about me, it was about other people. And I think some of my early talks, would have been when I was at the BBC, and supporting women in their career development and so on, really helped me to, notice that that I could be a role model, that I had something to offer in terms of my experience, but also as being a bit different.
Yeah.
And celebrating that and just getting on with it. So I kind of, in a way, I got over myself. But it's, going back to your question, what are the best and worst? I think it's helped me, that mindset change has helped me put my foot down in some situations where women have deserved better treatment or advocacy. I don't want to really pick out particular situations. I think it's really important not to single out people who've made missteps,
Yeah.
maybe unintentionally acted in a way that we would now consider discriminatory. I guess I haven't seen truly awful injustices myself. Most of the poor experiences I've had have been unintended and kind of unfortunate behavior. Probably the same kind of things that women in all industries see. Oh, you're a woman, so you must be more nurturing, and you're practically parental and stuff like that. I'm a woman who doesn't have any kids, so I'm not very parental at all.
Yeah.
And I reject that as a metaphor for leadership. But also, oh, you're more organized, or, anything that we want to do that's
You're good
team building.
yeah, all those
Yeah, you're good at all that kind of
psychological.
stuff, and organizing nights out and quizzes and stuff like that. Well, I hate organizing all that stuff. Well, yeah. So that is not me. I think it's that, like, overemphasis on tired stereotypes and not taking time to understand who I am as an individual, rather than, oh, you're a woman, therefore X is true. So some of the best I've seen is women supporting one another. When I was at the BBC, I was involved in the employee resource group known as WISTEM, for Women in STEM. And there were some cracking examples there of women offering their experience to support, encourage, and even share their skills, even their technical skills, with other women, and just people generally, but mostly women supporting women. Some very cool examples of generosity toward each other. So yeah, it's good and bad in there.
Perfect. And thanks for sharing. And I know what you shared in your early part of your career. I worked in a very male-dominated sales environment, and I can say that pretty much was me as well. To fit in, you kind of fit the mold of what's already there, and it takes a while to realize that actually you can be yourself, and it's much easier when you find that way. But in those early days, especially in the early career, I was only 20, in my early 20s at the time. That was just how I felt that you had to be, and realised that obviously that those things can change. It's interesting that you mentioned the BBC. I hear a lot about great things that the BBC are doing with their women in tech. They're at most of the women in tech events that I go to, and sharing stories. So it's great to hear the great work that they're doing over at the BBC. In terms of changes within the industry, what changes do you believe need to happen for the industry to make tech a truly inclusive place for all?
Well, I think inclusion is the key word there. We probably 10 years ago, we were much more focused on diversity and just bringing people into an environment. I saw a quote here at the FT the other day that was from one of the employee resource groups about, diversity being about inviting people into an existing culture, an environment, a way of working, a way of thinking about things. But inclusion is really about challenging how things are to make the environment more welcoming for lots of different people. And I think that is a significant shift. Now we focus much more on inclusion, and we know that diversity is going to be, a result of that focus. So, 10 years ago, we were falling over each other to bring in people from different genders and backgrounds, and different experiences and so on, different demographics. And then they would come into a place which is not welcoming, has not thought about inclusion, is not developing leaders to be inclusive, and then they get pissed off and they leave. Oops, I should say something more polite than that, but that's what happens, right? And that's what happens if you are focusing on creating a welcoming space for people to be themselves. Diversity comes as a result of inclusion. So we're more wise to that now, I think. We're more wise to the role of leaders, individual leaders, and people managers within organizations to create environments, to set expectation, to be the ones who create space for people to be themselves. And I think that's going to help a lot. But it's super hard work, and we have to keep challenging ourselves to continue to be curious and empathetic, to discover and welcome differences in the people that we work with, and to keep learning about our own biases and how our behavior impacts on others. So I think it is just that, more and more focus on inclusion, awareness of self, and impact on other people that's going to make the difference.
Perfect. And what a great answer. I couldn't agree more. I think, some companies, they do so well, or they think they do so well on focusing on diversity, and they just forget that the glue is the inclusion piece, and without it, it all just falls apart, doesn't it? So thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Pivoting the conversation towards your own personal leadership style, and something that I know we've discussed is how you hold valuable about being an authentic leader. And what some might not know about you is that you're also an introverted leader. So could you elaborate more on how you operate as an introverted leader, and how being an authentic leader has helped you in building diverse and inclusive teams?
So let's talk about introversion first. I mean, I think I knew more about introversion before I understood authenticity, and it became a declaration in order to support, I suppose, and encourage other introverts in my team. So I was noticing, I was leading an engineering team at the time, that I kind of made this declaration. It makes it sound like I was, I just don't know about that. But I was leading an engineering team, and I was trying to encourage the people managers to, increase their skill as managers and develop themselves as leaders. And I found, let's just say, many of them were reluctant. And it was a bit of this, there's some of it is shyness and some of it is introversion, a preference for introversion, getting energy from within, needing to restore and recover energy, and that sort of thing. So I kind of, in order to encourage them, I kind of said, well, you think that I am some kind of like extroverted, charismatic, people person who wants to be the center of attention. That is not the case. So let me tell you about Rebecca, the introvert, who still finds it rewarding to lead teams of people. And I also know how to take care of my own preferences. So I'm able to find that balance between what I need and what my team needs. And that helped people see that, to help the engineers in my team see that, well, maybe they could do this too. That if they found something in my story that resonated with them, if they compared their experience, themselves as a manager with the way that I was describing what I think is important as a manager and as a leader, then maybe they were kind of willing to consider taking a step up or taking on a larger team or becoming a people manager for the first time. And then as an extension of that, I became more aware of what authenticity means, and that is about being myself. And again, being willing to share who I am, what I need, what I think about things, how I cope, I guess, as a leader of people, given my personality. And so authenticity became a thing that was, again, it was my tactic to help others to develop themselves, almost like externalizing my thought process. And I still do it now a lot. I am constantly explaining to my own leadership team why I am making these decisions, why I'm doing things in a certain way. And I tell them a bit about myself as a person, why I'm choosing to pursue it in this way. Like energy levels is a big thing for me and for many people who identify as introverts, shall we say. And we often need to kind of take extra care to recover. And I do that. You said in the beginning, I've got a lot of hobbies that involve me and me. Like there's no interaction. I go for long walks. I do a lot of sewing. I cook at home, and I'm thinking about things in the background and kind of repairing my energy levels. So being able to be very open about that and put words to it that help other people relate or see themselves or some of themselves in my stories, I would like to think is helping them to relate to me as a leader, but also to look to me as an example that they might be able to learn from and follow.
Definitely. And it's great to hear as a leader that you're comfortable being a leader in that guise, because if we look back on traditional leaders and how leadership was seen, being authentic, being vulnerable and showing this side would have not been seen as what a leader should have been. But I think in this day and age where we are today, actually the best leaders are the ones that truly can be themselves and can help others to unearth their true selves as well, which I think is great for you to share. In terms of authenticity, then, because we just mentioned that within that last question, and I think for me, leading with authenticity enables transparency and vulnerability, as I mentioned, and like you shared, it enables workplaces, workforces to be more inclusive because it's creating that culture and welcoming people for who they truly are, and encourages people to be their true selves. So has being an authentic leader helped you in embracing your introverted style on your journey?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some of what I just described is along those lines. I think authenticity requires me really to act with humility and vulnerability. Humility is something that comes easy to me. That's, part of my upbringing and, how I learned to be in the world. It's an important value of mine. Vulnerability, not so much, because, we talked earlier about being a woman in a male-dominated field. You have to kind of back yourself and stand up for yourself, and there's no room for vulnerability because you've got to have your what together and you got to be on your game. And so it's taken me some time to learn vulnerability, but it's a good complement to humility, which I value so highly. Sharing what works for me and what doesn't work for me requires me to be those things. I need to be able to say, I have messed up here. I don't know it all. I need help. I want you to help me. Those kinds of things help me to demonstrate authenticity as a leader, also open up opportunities for people in my team to step up and fill gaps that I have and bring their strengths to bear. So that's kind of nice. It definitely helps others to get to know me, whether that's my colleagues or people in my team, and helps me to set an example for others to follow. It definitely gets in the way sometimes. You know, my preference for introversion means that I find introductions and meeting new people kind of challenging. I'm not shy, but it's draining on me to do lots of like new people meeting, which imagine I'm leading a department of 400 engineers, so I'm meeting someone new every day. And I also need to meet with vendors and partners and suppliers and all sorts of people. So I have to really make myself do that. But sometimes I bring a buddy with me. I'll bring someone from my team, and then it doesn't seem like, it's me against a bunch of new people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in that way, being authentic about that and being willing to know myself and how am I going to mitigate my preference to just like stay at my desk and not speak to anybody, I'm able to kind of push myself out there, but be clear with people, why I'm making choices and why I'm not every day, all day out shaking hands, doing the circuit. That's not the kind of leader I am.
Perfect. And I think there's potentially people listening to the show right now and thinking, Joe, what you're describing there as an introverted leader, that is me, or I'm an introverted person thinking of leadership and I'm just not sure whether it's the right step. So for anyone that would be hesitant or anyone that currently is an introverted leader, how should they embrace this style of their leadership journey? And what advice would you give to women in tech looking to advance their roles?
So I think any style can work in a leadership role, any personality, and we all have little wonky bits that need to be mitigated and managed. So the most important bit is not what your personality is or what your preferences are. It's whether you want to do it or not. And it goes back to the beginning of our conversation when I said, you need to be able to resist pressure to develop your career in a certain way. I think the tech industry is getting better at recognizing senior individual contributor roles and making space for that in organizational structures. But it used to be the case, and it still is in some companies, including the FT for the moment, and we are going to change that, especially in engineering, in order to advance your career at a certain point, you have to become a manager. And I think that's wrong. And I wouldn't encourage anyone to get into management because they want to advance their career and they think that's the only choice. So at the FT, we're going to do something about that. We're going to split out more senior roles into individual contributor roles or management tracks and help people, make good choices as they become more senior. But it's very tough to get experience and to experiment in a management or leadership role. Mostly I say to people, you can get experience in or like test the waters in one of two ways. One is leading on a project. So if you're not in charge as such in a direct way because people don't report to you, you're not their manager, but you have a responsibility for influencing, encouraging, motivating, leading people to work together on a common goal. And so that is a kind of leadership. It gives you a taste for, is it working for you? Do you find it rewarding? Are you learning about yourself and others? And is that the kind of thing that you would want to continue in a more formal way? And then the second way to get kind of a taster is mentoring.
Yeah.
And this is where you are taking some responsibility as a mentor for sharing your experience and helping another person learn and develop their skills. And that, again, that is some of the one-to-one part of being a manager of people. And it gives you a sense of how you are going to be as a helper and how you are at sharing your experience with someone else. I think those are the things that give you a taste for it. You could, well, I was going to say, it's harder for you to test out the tough stuff, the usually leading a project, you get into some challenging things or, team dynamics and stuff like that. So that's good. A lot of the individual, the one-on-one challenges that people managers face, you wouldn't be able to experience until you're in that position. So in that case, it's important to talk to people who are managers, understand what the highs and lows are, what are the downsides, what are the challenging bits, what's required to manage those situations and manage yourself in those situations. How did other people managers learn that part of the job? So I think it's important that if you're wondering about becoming a manager or a leader, rather than just like go flying into it, to do your research and consider the downside or the tricky side, not just the upside. I think personally, I think the combination is very rewarding, but it's not for everyone. And then the other bit of advice, I guess, is back to that stereotype I mentioned earlier, that women in particular can fall into this trap that society assumes that we're all super nurturing and we're great at managing team dynamics and we can get the best out of every person we ever meet. And that we would be natural people managers and leaders, and that's just not true. So you have to answer that question for yourself. You're not signing up to be a carer or a parent or whatever. And it's not about being nice to people. There's like hard work involved and a business purpose, usually several business purposes. So really need to know what you're getting into. And just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're going to be right for it. So, or even enjoy it. So in that case, you definitely want to be the spider and not the fly. Don't get trapped into it.
Wow. Great perspective. And I love to hear your perspective on that individual contributor role. It's a topic that I've spoken to many women about, and how they've highlighted how they're pushed into that management, people manager role to be able to advance and progress forward. And it's great to hear the changes that you're looking to bring into the FT as well, because people management, it isn't for everybody, and not everyone's great at it. And some people are just experts at whatever it is that they do, and that technical expert path, it's a need in particularly large organizations. It's definitely a need to have those individuals there. So it's great to hear that that's something that you're aware of and you can see and looking to bring into your organization as well. How would you advise leadership or hiring managers to not overlook potential introverted workers that might not be putting themselves forward because they don't feel like they're ready, but they've got those people qualities that could make them future leaders within the business, or applicants in the process for high profile leadership roles to not be overlooked because they might not be the obvious choice, maybe?
I don't. So I don't think that introverts are overlooked per se. I think that introversion is confused with shyness, and they're very different things. They often go together, but not always. And I think that people who are more shy and maybe hang back a little, or are less likely to be noticed, they're more often overlooked than introverts are. I mean, you can't tell an introvert walking down the street. That's just not a thing. Inclusion, though, is about welcoming people of all sorts. So as leaders ourselves, it's our job to uncover what makes people tick and what they have to offer. And so I would say that, the way that we make a welcoming environment for men and women, for introverts and extroverts, for people who are shy and people who are very outgoing, is kind of the same. It's about curiosity. It's about really understanding what people are interested in, what motivates them, what they're good at, what they're not good at, how self-aware they are, and helping them to kind of be their best. And that includes showing them, you said sometimes people hang back or hold themselves back. And you heard some of that in my story where I was going, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And finding ways of encouraging people to dip their toe in the water, take a step forward, and so on. So I think those kinds of leadership skills are essential for us to create space for different kinds of people, including introverts, including people who are shy.
Perfect. And along with diversity, I mentioned at the start of the show that we were going to talk about equity as well. And I know it's something that you're passionate about, and you're a huge champion for equity within the workplace. So making sure team members of all backgrounds have access to growth opportunities. Why is it important, and how can leaders promote equity day to day in their role?
I think this is the toughest thing because it requires us to recognize and mitigate our own biases. We all have them because we're humans. They creep into everything that we do, and the only way that we can create a more equitable workplace to level the playing field for everyone in our teams and our departments is looking at processes and decision making where those biases creep in. And I think it's even tougher on us when resources are scarce. So when we're selecting someone to attend a training course where there's limited spaces available, when we're looking at who is ready for promotion. And these are all kind of typical business processes that if we just, go about them as normal, then all of our biases are at work and we tend to choose the same people, and that is not what equity is about. So I think it's about continuing to look at and review our process, all of our processes, to ask ourselves questions about the decisions that we're making and whether they are, as open as we can make them, where we're stripping out those kind of inbuilt biases, that we're not taking shortcuts, to pair with other leaders. I'm quite a big fan of, bringing in a buddy and saying, okay, this is the decision I need to make, and I'm going about it this way. Can you spot a bias here? Can you see a way of thinking about it differently? Is there something that I need to make more transparent? And how can I improve? And I think it's important not to aim for perfection, or certainly not in one step, but to keep improving, which means making mistakes, being willing to put my hand up and, talk about it as a mistake, and then move on from that. So yeah, I think equity is dependent on our awareness of and mitigation against bias. And that is an ongoing challenge.
Definitely. I completely agree. I think it's that continuous loop, that continuous learning, that continuous education that everybody needs to take on board and be responsible for themselves. And I really like that tip that you gave around the paired decision making. It's not one that I've heard before. It probably happens. It probably people just don't share it, but I think it's a really good way to, I suppose, check yourself and check some of your decision making on some of those key things that come up, and those key decisions that you need to make along the way as a leader, and particularly a leader of a large organization, large team, and everything else. Um, in terms of where we're at, I mean, we're right at the end of the show now. So I think today it's been really inspiring chatting to you, Rebecca. I've really enjoyed all of the insights, your experiences, your tips that you've given along the way as well. But to wrap things up, what I would like to do is ask for some final kind of parting advice. We discussed earlier about embracing that non-linear career path and encouraging others to not feel trapped. Don't be that fly in the web scenario. So for the women listening in who have resonated today with your story, with your journey, with the episode in its whole entirety, who are looking to further advance their career, or currently they just feel trapped in where they are, what would be your top 5 pieces of advice that you would give to those women listening in to do something different today?
Okay, well, let's see if I can do 5. Firstly, I would say you need to know what motivates you. I've said quite often that I followed an accidental route into technology. My spider webby career is kind of here, there, and everywhere. What is in common is what motivates me and what I find rewarding in my work. And so I have never been able to say, one day I want to be CTO, but I have always said, I want to lead people. I want to help people develop. I want to have an impact on an organization. I like variety in my work. These are the kind of things that motivate me. So knowing your motivators is a better way, I think, for lots of people to consider future possibilities rather than, going after a job title.
Yeah.
So that's number 1, I would say, is know your motivators. And a close follow-on to that is knowing your strengths. One of the ways to overcome that feeling that you might not be ready for the next thing or this new job that is presenting itself, or someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, would you apply for this role or come work with me to do X or Y? I think you have to know what your strengths are and focus on those. That has to be the dominant reaction when someone invites you to apply for a job or when you're considering one yourself. Focus on your strengths, know them very well. And I would say it's definitely true of me. I'm not the best person to say what my strengths are, partly because I don't know what impact my strengths have on other people unless I ask them. So it's a good exercise, I would say, for people to go and ask their colleagues, their boss, their team member, their best friend, what are the strengths that you see in me that are transferable and applicable in different situations? And so having a good handle on what your strengths are helps you prepare for interviews, consider opportunities, and be more willing to say, yeah, I'll give that a go because I know what my strengths are. I know what motivates me and I know what my strengths are. I think having examples and listening to the stories of other people, the experience of other people is really important. So podcasts like yours, Kelly, I think these are the kind of ways that we can discover connections and find experience that we can relate to and be inspired by. And I was talking earlier about, learning from other managers and leaders, what are the good and bad sides of their experience, and how did they learn to do what they did. I think listening out for that experience is really important. So that's 3 things: motivators, strengths, and then listening to the examples of others and really digging into what others' experience is and how that can be useful to you. Number 4, I would say, is always buddy. Always have a pairing partner. You're never, ever on your own. There's always going to be someone there, and don't be afraid to ask for help or ask for a second opinion or test out your ideas on someone else. And, that I think it's always important to kind of get the ideas outside of your head. As I've said, as an introvert, I'm less likely to do that, but even saying them out loud to myself is better than, having everything rolling around inside my brain. So use a buddy, talk things through, get your thoughts together. That's a good way to prepare for anything that comes up. And then maybe my 5th tip is, like, what I wanted to say was, don't be afraid to change.
Okay.
Change direction, quit a job, leave a company. If it's not working out and you know it in your gut, then don't be afraid to change. I think I don't like to consider regrets in my career, but we all have them, and there are little moments where we think, oh, if only I'd done that at that time, who knows how things would have turned out. But I think what the real point is to learn how to be vulnerable, that it's okay to change course if the one that you're on isn't working out. And I think very much that is about being the spider and not the fly.
100%. I was about to say, don't be trapped like the fly. Be prepared to make the change, be that spider. Wow. I've really enjoyed speaking to you today, Rebecca. I think this has been one of my favourite interviews that I've done, and I've spoke to many people and they've all been great. I've really enjoyed learning about your experiences, hearing some of your stories and advice that you've parted with us today as well. So thank you very much for coming on board the podcast series, and I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thanks, Kelly. I enjoyed the chat too. It's nice to reflect in a positive way on things that I've done and learned, and I hope that others will find it helpful.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elevate Women in Tech. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful conversations with trailblazers in the tech industry.